location in a new place, set up a food tour. If you just do searches on food tours, you can normally find a few in a city. And what that does is, one, it gets you someone you can ask questions to. It's normally a local giving the tour, obviously. Someone you can ask questions to about maybe specialty foods for that country or location. And then they will always give you a whole list of recommendations of restaurants to go to that are like local recommendations. So it's just it's different.
Welcome to Just Travel Podcast. Here is your host, Robert Smith.
Welcome to episode 7 of the Just Travel Podcast. In today's episode, my guests and I discuss many travel topics. Among them are food tours, thru-hikes, and essential experiences. Let's get to the show. So today we are joined by Sherry from Ottsworld Travel Blog. She is an award-winning travel blogger. She has written for many major publications, for example, USA Today, Forbes, Buzzfeed, and Business Insider. Oprah Magazine named her one of the top online influencers. Sherry, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you give the listeners a little about yourself?
Sure. Let's see. I started blogging back in 2006, so a long, long time ago. I think I just celebrated my 13th year in blogging last September, and probably contrary to other bloggers, maybe, I don't know, but prior to that, I was 14 years in a corporate career, and I had moved all around the country and pursued, climbing the ladder. And when I was 36 years old, I just decided I needed a break, and in 2006, I quit my job and took off to go travel around the world for a year. And I had I really called it a journal. I don't even think we even used the term blog back then, that I kept track of what I was doing, and my parents knew where I was and so on. And that's how it all started. And now 13 and a half years later, here I am.
So now you were a full-time traveler for 10 years or 9 years?
11, actually. 11 years, okay. Yeah, so when I left in 2006, I did go around the world on that first trip. I think I hit 23 countries or something like that. And I came back. I had sublet my apartment, but I came back to New York City, was my home at that point. And I decided I didn't want to be there, and I wanted to stay on the road. So I sold everything I owned and then moved off to Vietnam and taught English, because that's what you did back then. Yeah. But yeah, and then ever since then, I've been out on the road, and I actually was nomadic for, about 11 years. And then I settled down here in Denver to have a home base again back in 2017. And that's where I am right now, at my home base in Denver.
So you said you lived in Vietnam for a while teaching English. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was great. Well, great and very challenging at the same time. So at that time, I was about 38 years old. I had just left this really, I had left a really good corporate career in IT. And here I was deciding to go live in this partially developed country to teach English for $14 an hour, with a whole bunch of other, ESL teachers that were probably 21, 22. Wow. So it was hard. I mean, that was a big transition for me. And I think that was really when it hit me that I wasn't just traveling around the world anymore. I hadn't just given up my job to go travel around the world. I had changed my career at that point and made some really hard decisions in life. So mentally that was kind of going on, but I chose Vietnam because I had actually traveled there as part of my original career break, and I loved it. I loved the food. I was fascinated with the motorbikes and that motorbike culture. Yeah. And there was a part of me that I like a good challenge. So there was a part of me that decided if I could ride a motorbike or drive a motorbike there, I could do anything, I decided. So that was one of my goals. I went there, teach English, learn more about the culture, and learn how to ride a motorbike.
Wow. So you decided to, quit your job, and then you really enjoyed that, and you continue to do that for full, like you said, 11 years. How has that travel changed you?
Oh, goodness. So many ways. I think a couple of the things, and one that's really relevant right now in the situation we're in, is when you're nomadic for that long and you don't have a home, you don't know where you're going, and as a blogger, you don't generally know where your next money is coming from lots of times too, where your next project is going to be. You learn to deal with uncertainty, like incredible uncertainty. You don't know. I start out every year sometimes and think, I wonder how I'm going to make money this year, because, lots of the stuff that we do is not repeatable necessarily. So that idea of uncertainty, and I think, that started when I did that first original year-long career break. And there's always uncertainty when you travel, especially long-term travel, I think, backpacking type travel. Sometimes, I left my itinerary pretty open. So you meet people, you go somewhere else, you figure out something else, you don't speak the language, you have to deal with that. You end up walking away with a lot of patience and ability to deal with uncertainty, as well as an ability to take risks, because I think that's what it takes to do something like that. So yeah, and I tell you what, in a time like this, I've had a lot of people ask about, how are you doing during the pandemic, right? And I always say, like, uncertainty is my friend. This doesn't bother me at all. This is like being on the road to me.
Right. So you've been kind of, obviously you're not on the road right now because of the COVID-19. And so you're just busy writing about what you have done in your past. And
I'm actually really enjoying this in a, unfortunate way, I suppose. But for me, it's slowing down. Last year, I was gone, I would say at least 85% of the time. So I was at the Denver airport more than I was at my apartment, I think. And so this has been a chance for me to really finally stop and do projects that I've wanted to do. I'm still catching up from writing last year, quite frankly, which is nice because I had a really big backlog and I had a busy schedule this year originally. But so I'm cooking a ton. I'm enjoying my home, which I haven't really been able to do. So it's nice. And in Denver, we can still get out and walk around and do exercise. So I don't have a car. I have a bike. I've been biking all over and learning the city. I also foster kittens. So I'm having a good time. It's a new adventure.
Yeah, I think people probably start feeling a little more safe in the next few months, and hopefully by next year it'll be more open. Hopefully, I think people will take full advantage of state parks and national parks and things like that. And you're being in Denver, you're kind of pretty close to a lot of those ones I really enjoy. I actually did a podcast a week ago on our family trip, 2 weeks from Ohio out to Yellowstone, all the national parks, on the way to Yellowstone, then down Utah and back from the Grand Canyon. It was a wonderful trip. We did about 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, U.S. itself has amazing sights.
Yeah, we are really lucky. If we're going to be held to, say, domestic travel here, even let's say for the remainder of the year, we're pretty darn lucky. We've got an incredible country with varied landscapes and plenty of open space if you're just willing to try to go somewhere different. So yeah, I think that all the time. Like, we are really lucky in that respect.
I know you don't want to just say one place because that's just too hard, but like the top 3 places in North America that would really be good places for people to go, if they're going to try to stay domestically, what could they go see?
I've got to first, of course, say Alaska. I love Alaska. I've been there numerous times. One of the things that I always recommend to people is go to Alaska in the winter. I know that's a little different, but I was there a couple of years ago, and let me tell you, it's the best place to see the Northern Lights. Go to Fairbanks. It's a dry climate, so they don't have the overcast that, say, Iceland or Norway has. So you have a great chance of seeing the Northern Lights. It's cheaper in the winter. You've got dog sledding. You've got all that kind of Nordic stuff right here in our own country, and we tend to overlook it because we think it's cold and it's not quite as exotic as Iceland or Norway or Scandinavia. So that's one that I highly recommend. And even like the train, the Alaska Railroad, runs in the winter. So you can take the train into Denali Park, get off, go snowshoeing. There is no one in the park, no one. And then ride the train back to Fairbanks. So there's a bunch of really cool stuff you can do there. And I also love it in the summer, of course, too. Let's see, that's one. North America. I'll be a little bit traditional and say Northern California. I did a really great road trip through Northern California a couple of times. And in fact, at that time, I did it was called a Juicy camper van. And I just went out on my own solo, and it's, kind of a self-contained camper, even has a little kitchen, but you can just roll it up into campgrounds and use the toilets and showers there, which was great. But when I say Northern California, I mean north of San Francisco. So go up to Mendocino and that coast up there. It is gorgeous. The drive is gorgeous, much less crowded than, say, the typical Highway 1. You can also do wine and stuff outside of, Sonoma and Napa, so you can get out to more unusual places. Also, Lassen Volcanic National Park is up there, which very few people know about. It's completely overshadowed by Yosemite. So there is, in fact, I called that whole trip when I did it the B-sides. It's the places that not everyone thinks of when they think of California. It's kind of the B-sides. So I think there's a lot of cool opportunity there. And then I've got to pick someplace in Canada. I love Canada. Oh boy. I went to Newfoundland last summer and did a beautiful hike along the coast called the East Coast Trail. I think that would be right up there with some of my favorite places because it's also very unusual. The culture it's Canadian, but yet it's their own little version of Canada, like unique culture up there, different accent, icebergs floating by. It's a really unique place.
It sounds amazing. I've heard most of that area, Nova Scotia and all that area is pretty cool. Beautiful scenery. You talk about the hikes, and I read where you have done quite a few they call them Thru-Hikes, right?
Yeah.
And you've done quite a lot of the big ones. Can you kind of give the listeners a little more insight to what that's like to doing those?
Sure. It all started with the one that's probably the best known, which is the Camino de Santiago. And I did that, it had to be about 10 years ago now. And when I did it, I had heard about it, but I really didn't know much about it. And I just took off on my own and I started walking. I really didn't know anything about it at the time. It took me 5 weeks. I think it's around 500 miles. 5 weeks to walk across northern Spain. It's an ancient pilgrimage, which is steeped in religion, but you certainly don't have to be religious to do it. I just found it as a really interesting challenge in an interesting way. I mean, you talk about slow travel, it doesn't get any slower than that. But what makes a hike like that, a pilgrimage or that type of thru hike, really unique is you basically walk from village to village, and in the villages there are places to stay at different levels. It is actually, I always say, doing the Camino de Santiago is probably the cheapest way to travel through Europe. And because you can stay at these hostels that are called albergues for €10 a night, somewhere around there. But you're in a big room with 30 other people also in bunk beds sleeping. So it's a really interesting, beautiful hike. And I think for me, the draw is I don't have to camp. I can stop in all these villages along the way and really get to know the food and the people. It's a slow way to travel. It's a beautiful countryside. And it's kind of meditative. It's not hard hiking. It's more long distance hiking. So it's kind of building that long distance kind of mindset. It's hard on your feet. I will say that. I had a lot of blisters, a lot of feet management. But, pretty soon, walking 15 to 25 miles a day every day becomes normal. And your whole world just simplifies into, walk, eat, sleep, and that's it. And it's a beautiful time to just really kind of slow down and think about things. So once I did that, I ended up loving it. It was just a really great experience. And immediately, as I was finishing it up, you go, oh, wait a minute, I don't want this to end. And what else can I do like this? And after that, it really sent me on another journey to find alternatives to the Camino. Lots of people just continue doing the Camino. But I don't like to do the same thing twice. So I really thought, where else in the world can we do hikes like this? And then for the last decade, I've been on this mission to find similar type hikes where you can go longer distances and, not have to camp, and really be kind of a cultural experience as well as an adventure for your mind and body.
Are there any hikes like that in the U.S.? I mean, like Appalachian Trail, or is it just mostly around the other parts?
Well, the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Coast Trail are also obviously considered through hikes, but I have not done them. They are much more rugged. They're a different level. They're that we're going to take all of our camping gear and camp every night and bring our own food and water and all that. And so I do think that would be interesting. It's just not what excites me as much. And I like the idea of going into other countries and doing it. But I do see that this form of kind of long distance hiking or through hiking will become, or has really become, more and more popular every year. So there are a lot of other countries that have jumped on this bandwagon and created long distance coastal routes, hikes, and all this stuff that are anywhere from, say, 200 miles to 1,000 miles. So there's a famous one in Nepal. There's one in Jordan that I haven't done that I really want to do, that goes all across Jordan. You stay in villages. There was one I did one last year in Japan, and that was a short one, but it was hard. It was challenging, but you stayed in these little villages at guest houses and ate the most incredible food. They're all over. I did one in Turkey, the East Coast Trail in Newfoundland. I forget them all. But yeah, in fact, I just wrote a big article on kind of a roundup of alternatives to the Camino based on these 10 years of doing hikes all over.
So you talk about, getting to know the culture, languages, things like that. It's probably a little easier when you're traveling more and on the road, longer, or in the same place longer. But for the average traveler or vacationer who has a week to 2 weeks, there are a lot of times they're just going and seeing the top sites, the big sites, landmarks. What are ways they can kind of get into the culture, get into more of the local life?
I think there's a number of ways they can. It depends on if they're traveling independently, so they've kind of organized their own vacation. I think I personally do think that staying in places like Airbnb and stuff like that is a quicker way in normally. One, what it does, because you normally have access to your own kitchen then, it forces you, if you're a frugal traveler like me, like I like to cook in my kitchen. I like to make my own breakfast or make a lunch to take or something to just kind of save money so I'm not going out all the time. But what that does is forces you into a market in a foreign country, which I think is fascinating, whether it's just a regular old grocery store or an outdoor market. I can get lost for hours, trying to figure out what stuff is, prices, how do they use this, etc. So I think that's one way. I think there are a lot of other things like, I think it's called eatwith.com. Eatwith.com is kind of, it's where locals actually invite you into their home and they make dinner and you pay for it, kind of like you would pay for a dinner that you went out to a restaurant, but there's a whole bunch of obviously local interaction. And it's a wonderful way to, one, get to know the cuisine, get to know someone. I also say I do a lot with food, I guess, now that I think about it, but I like to eat.
Yeah, I do too.
To me, on your first day of a vacation in a new place, set up a food tour. If you just do searches on food tours, you can normally find a few in a city. And what that does is, one, it gets you someone you can ask questions to. It's normally a local giving the tour, obviously. Someone you can ask questions to about maybe specialty foods for that country or location. And then they will always give you a whole list of recommendations of restaurants to go to. That are like local recommendations. So it's different than, say, going off of Rick Steves or something like that. So I found that it can get you much deeper, faster, and much more educated about the food culture there. So those are some of the ways, I think. But the other thing, just anytime, whether you're there for a week, 2 weeks, or 2 months, I think you have to open yourself up to saying yes to things. It's just been one of my travel mottos forever. And I think that will lead you, keep your mind open. Don't overplan everything. Let things happen. Talk to people, and then see where it takes you. There are some countries that are so friendly. Jordan is one of them. If you just talk to locals, you'll be invited over for tea. You'll be invited over probably for food. I mean, it just goes, and it's a beautiful thing. But you got to be open to that.
Yeah, I think food kind of shows the culture of people, and I don't know why, but it seems to.
It lightens everyone up.
Yeah,
makes everyone happy.
Everybody eats food, right? So you got to eat food. I had a trip planned to go to start out in Barcelona in July.
Yeah.
I know, obviously that's not going to happen probably.
Well,
but I was looking forward to doing a food tour because I've heard the cuisine in Barcelona is just awesome.
It's incredible.
And I really thought that would be really cool because that would show you the different local places. Plus, like I said, you have almost like a local guide in a way too.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I actually got to do kind of like a tour or a food tour. We were on a river cruise, doing the Christmas markets last December, and they did one in Vienna of the Christmas markets. It was this local company that did all this, and they we got to like 4 different Christmas markets, and they had at least 4 or 5 different booths, and they had it all like set up, these people's local booths, like different like meats and cheeses and honey and bread. Yes, it was really nice.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. I just put out a newsletter today, and the heading was, join me in Spain this weekend. And of course, that was so people would open it. But there's a company called Devour Food Tours that I love what they're doing. I've taken their tours before in different countries, but they specialize in Europe, and they have figured out a way to do some kind of virtual tours. So they have their local guides doing virtual tours on U.S. time about different food culture and so on. And the tour or class, basically, I'm taking this Saturday evening or afternoon is from Barcelona. It's a guide from Barcelona that's going to be teaching us how to make 3 traditional tapas dishes plus sangria.
Wow.
And when you sign up for it, it's really reasonable. It's only like $20 US. When you sign up for it, you get sent a whole list of, here's your grocery list. Here's everything you're going to need. You can either cook with me or you can sit back and drink sangria and just watch. But my plan is to I think it'll be great. I love the idea that, some kid from Barcelona is cooking in the middle of the night at 1 a.m. for us. But for the Spanish, 1 a.m. is no big deal. That's like dessert time for them.
Yeah.
But I think there's some fun stuff like that. But I'm really excited to make some Spanish food this weekend.
Yeah, that's really cool. How people are using virtual media and technology to find better ways to make money or to
and they need to. It's a small company,
right?
And some of the things I'm not very interested in when it comes to virtual, but when I can do something that's really hands-on and live, like in real time, as opposed to like, just watch this video about our city, I get really excited about it. Because one, I can ask them questions if I want to, and I don't know, it's one step closer to feeling like I'm there.
I think I read where you were talking, there's more about travel experiences, or the travel experiences?
Yeah.
Where it kind of goes along with this, where...
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yes, I did just write an article. I went to Madison, Wisconsin. This is another thing that I think will be more of a trend as we come out of this quarantine, is these kind of second cities. 2 of my favorite places I went last year were second cities in the U.S., which was Cincinnati, Ohio. I had an incredible time, and Madison, Wisconsin. We don't all need to go to New York or Chicago or L.A. or whatever. Like, these cities have a lot going on, and it's fascinating. But Madison, what actually even got me to go there was they have these, they call them essential experiences. And I think I've been traveling so long that I get really tired of being lectured to. So I'm not really big on tours that just, lecture you about history or this or that, I like to be involved. I want to be able to really dig in, get to know someone, get hands-on whenever I can. So they've worked with this consultant that helped them put together these essential experiences, and he basically helped them determine what was uniquely Wisconsin. And so, if I were to ask you, like, what do you think of when you think of Wisconsin? You're probably going to say cheese, maybe even football.
Packers, cold.
Yeah. And
beer.
Beer, good one. I think of, supper clubs or old fashions. That's a big part of their culture. So one of the experiences they offered, I love old fashioned, I like cocktails. And I love the concept of supper clubs, but I wanted to understand them more because it's a very uniquely Wisconsin, kind of northern United States thing. And they had this experience called the Bitters Boot Camp. And I was so intrigued with it. I'm like, that sounds really fun. And so that's one of the things I did with them was you learn how to make bitters, but it was more than that. Like, you learned all about the history of supper clubs and why they came to be and why the Wisconsin old fashioned is so unique, because they make it very differently and why they make it differently. And it was this deep dive into a very simple subject that was quintessentially Wisconsin. They do that also, like you can go to a dairy farm and, be able to, get hands-on there and learn more about the dairy industry. So, these aren't normally things you'd maybe think of as like, ooh, the dairy industry, yay. But it is something that really it makes Wisconsin. It's part of Wisconsin culture. They have an experience on like how to make a cheese platter. And while you're doing that, you get, entertained instead of being lectured to. You're more entertained by an actual kind of narrative story of how it all came to be, and you get involved. And that's the kind of experiences that I love when I travel. I feel so much more connected to a place.
Definitely. I mean, you instead of like getting a regular tour through a museum or history, I mean, although I love history and museums, but sometimes it just doesn't sink in. You don't memorize it, or don't remember it as you come home. Those memories you're talking about is what you remember more and want to share with others.
Yeah. And that whole share with others thing is important for me because that's what I do for a living. So It's like when I get excited about something where I can be totally hands-on and I can't wait to share with everyone, that comes out. So it can be, I love it. And there's a few places where I've come across in the world that really get that concept. And those are the things that I gravitate to. I even did this, I haven't written about it yet, but I hopefully in this time during the pandemic, I could get to it. Like there was this talking about kind of Catalan cuisine or Spanish cuisine. I was in Costa Brava, which is just north of Barcelona, and they have this group there called the Grandmothers of Sils. And Sils is just a tiny little town, little village. And one man put this together, basically trying to preserve the old recipes of the women there. And he basically brought all these grandmothers together, and they do cooking demonstrations. And like I went and cooked for the whole day with, I don't know, it must have been 8 different grandmothers, and we made a whole like 4-course meal. And it was like being with my own grandmother. It was so fun. Very, very different, and it really was something that I'll never forget. So stuff like that I think it just takes it a step further than like, this is just a, normal cooking class or whatever.
I was wondering, so we've talked about the North America top spots. How about outside of North America?
Oh, so many. First of all, I should probably explain, I gravitate to pretty off the beaten track places. So I gravitate to the remote, the unusual, the remoter, the better. So for me, I'd probably have to say Mongolia has always been one of my favorites. Antarctica, but specifically in Antarctica, the Ross Sea, which is an area that not many people ever go to. I've mentioned Jordan a couple times. I'll say Jordan just because it's not that remote, but I think that it's really the nicest people in the world that I've ever met have been from Jordan. Nepal. Boy, trying to think other. I do also love Ireland. Yeah. And then even like within, let's say, a very normal place like Germany. Lots of people have been to Germany. But we normally go to like certain parts of Germany, Bavaria, maybe Berlin. One of my favorite places was a region or a province. I don't know what they call it there. District, I don't know.
State or something.
Called, Thuringia. And Thuringia is really in the middle of the country if you look. And there's no big, well-known towns there, at least for Americans. It's kind of like the Midwest of Germany. And I traveled through there and had so much fun. I went to it's the home of where the bratwurst was created, the Bratwurst Museum. I did all kinds of really fascinating things there. Learned how to play different card games with people. And I fell in love with that. It's mainly because it felt like you were discovering something that other people didn't know about. And to me, that's what travel is about. Like, for me, it's about exploration. It's about feeling like I'm Lewis and Clark discovering something new, which is why I gravitate to those more unusual places or the remote places, I think.
There's travel myths that I think hold people back. And maybe it'll be even harder for people now coming out of COVID-19. Can you kind of maybe squash some of those travel myths? Or
Well, of course, Of course, everyone thinks that, they think that that travel is expensive, and it doesn't have to be, you know. There are ways you can travel on the cheap. For a long time, in the beginning of my kind of writing career, I was specializing in longer term travel. So I would talk a lot about, doing, say, 2 months, 3 months sabbatical, and, how you could do that on the cheap. But I think it's just, what you're trying to get out of it. There's travel is kind of as learning and further enriching yourself. And then there's travel is just like, I need to get away. And I think that travel in which you're looking to further enrich yourself or learn something about a culture, you can do that on a budget with, you can do Airbnbs, you can do those things like Eat With that are generally cheaper and introduce you to more locals, and then, allow you to probably find cheaper places to travel through the locals or things to do. I would say the other big fear is just, that the world is scary. It's unsafe. And I think for me, all these years, I've really been traveling alone. I do travel with friends too, occasionally, but I started out primarily, am still a solo traveler. And even though I've had a few, let's say, strange run-ins, I really haven't had anything horrible happen. I've been very lucky, I suppose. But I think what we have to realize is that, what we see on the news is about a country, say even Jordan or the Middle East, is normally the stuff, it's the bad stuff, it's the fearful stuff. And we really have to get out and see it ourselves to understand, make our own opinions about it, basically, and not let the news form our opinions. But that's a big hurdle to get over for lots of people, I understand. I always say, if you want to ease yourself into a culture that maybe you're intimidated by, a small group tour is a great way to do it. I travel a lot with Intrepid Travel, and they do small group tours, but they're very immersive. They always have local guides. The local guides are with you the whole time as you travel throughout that country, so you can ask them questions. They don't stay at chains or anything like that. It's all, they deal with, work with local people. You have dinner at locals' homes and things like that. And you really learn a lot about the country. But as a solo traveler, I used them to travel through Morocco, Egypt. I also used them for Vietnam once. So those places that I was slightly more intimidated by, I suppose. And it's just, it will really open up that country to you in a safe way. I think that's one of my biggest, for women who might be intimidated traveling by themselves or fearful of going to, say, Egypt, Morocco, Middle East, whatever, it's a great way to do it. Because you'll never be fully alone, kind of thing. And you'll always have someone there that knows the culture and will be your advocate.
You've traveled for many years, and you've shared some of your stories so far. Have you left out any more of the most memorable, like one or two of the most memorable ones?
Oh, there's lots. But I know that you had Dave and Deb on from the Planet D, and I don't know, I don't think they got into this, but I traveled with them. That was also probably back in 2010 or something. And we did something called the Mongol Rally. So I told you one of my favorite countries is Mongolia. We basically, the three of us, bought a car in London and drove it from London to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, in something called the Mongol Rally for charity. And it took 5 weeks. It was some of the most stressful travel we've all ever done. It was crazy. There's no support. There's a starting party and ending party. You can go whatever route you want. And, we traveled 9,000 miles through like 13 countries. It was incredible. And I think none of us had any mechanical knowledge either, really. But the thing that we did know better than anything is the power of travel and how if you need help, generally the world is a good place, and you would find people to help. And we did. Like, we certainly ran into trouble here and there, whether it be car trouble, whatever. And we found help. Locals would help you every time. So yeah, it was a really, really great project. We raised a lot of money for charity. And then at the end, if you did make it all the way to the end, which at that time about 50% of the cars made it who were in the race. If you did actually make it, then you left your car there and it was donated to charity and stayed in Mongolia. The race, the Mongol Rally, still happens today. It has changed a little bit. But back when we did it, it was still like that. So there was that. I also did, after that, I was so, I loved doing the whole concept of like these charity races that were unusual. I think it was 2 years after that, myself and another girlfriend drove an auto rickshaw through India for 2,000 miles in 2 weeks, also on one of these charity races, and raised a bunch of money. So those are probably two of the most memorable, because they were just, it was a really intense travel, but also like you're so close to that culture. I call it, traveling close to the ground. I mean, when you're driving through the middle of India as two women in a rickshaw, you really get to know the people in the culture. So it was really fun. I'm trying to think other really epic trips. It's funny. I'm working on a little ebook about some of this stuff. I know I mentioned Antarctica, and I specifically mentioned the Ross Sea, and the Ross Sea trip was really memorable to me because you actually start from New Zealand. So most Antarctica trips will start from South America and go to the Antarctic Peninsula because it's the closest. You go through the Drake Passage, and it's 2 days to get through the passage and so on. But this one started in New Zealand, and it really went the way of the ancient explorers. So Scott and Edmondson, they all left from New Zealand and went this route. And you get over to, it takes like 8-9 days to get through the Southern Ocean and get to the Ross Sea in that eastern part of Antarctica, kind of. And that's where the McMurdo, the U.S. base is. That's where the historic huts are, where Edmondson and Scott wintered over. So there's a lot. It's really fascinating. No one is there. I think 500 people or so a year go to the Ross Sea, and about 50,000 people a year go to the Antarctic Peninsula. So I think that just kind of comes back to that. I really like feeling like I'm an explorer, going somewhere new, teaching people.
Is it different from that point of view, or that part of the Antarctica?
Is it different? The
view or
landscapes to me were probably similar. Sometimes you see different wildlife. So there are different types of penguins on that side. And there were some that were the same too, but there were definitely some that were different. There's different bases to see. It does feel a little bit different, and there's just so much more history there.
Okay.
That's where all the first landings of Antarctica took place. So some really great stories, and to think that you're in these same places making these same landings as these historic explorers, it's pretty incredible. What
are some 4 to 5 things you just never leave home when you travel?
Oh boy. The first thing that comes to mind is a little pillow that I take with me everywhere.
Well, I asked that to Dave and Deb, and the first thing he said was Gold Bond.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yep. Well, yeah, of course. Mine is my little baby pillow that I take with me everywhere.
Yeah.
But I would say first aid kit normally, because lots of times I do a lot of adventure travel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important to me. What else do I take every time? Things to make. Oh, I know a good one. compression socks. I just wrote an article about it too. But any kind of long distance flight, any flight over normally 3 hours, I will wear them. I actually had a big scare 2 years ago and had contracted blood clots from flying, and then they actually ended up as pulmonary emboli in three of them in my lungs before we got it diagnosed. So that was a huge scare, and ever since then I've been a huge advocate of compression socks and getting up and walking every 2 hours and all of that. So definitely compression socks, without a doubt. I think what else? Always bring a Cliff Bar. Actually, I always bring about 5 Cliff Bars. That's my emergency food. Yeah. My hangry food. I always got to have a hangry bar. Yeah. Because there's so many times where you just get, stuff happens. You move from this tour to this tour, or this bus, or this something breaks down, or whatever, and it's like, oh my God, I need food now. So that's pretty important. Other than that, I would say, for me, of course, it's a laptop, because it's always work generally for me. So.
And your cameras.
Yes, and my cameras, without a doubt. Yeah, I have a whole electronics bag typically. Yeah.
So before I go to my final 5, get your opportunity to give the listeners let them know where you can be found.
Sure. Well, you can find me on my blog, which is ottsworld.com. And then all of my social media is generally at Ottsworld, OTTSWORLD. Some things I have coming up. I know and I should also say, things I have coming up. I run tours when we're normally traveling. So I offer tours out to my readers. They are generally, a week or so to an unusual destination. So like I've run a couple to Ireland, but even though Ireland's very popular, I do County Mayo, which is a county that not many people go to. And it's always some kind of adventure type hiking, but also cultural. And I did, my last trip was just in February down to El Salvador to go surfing, a whole week of surfing and yoga, which was really fun. So I do run some trips, and you can learn about those on my website. And then I'm also working on an ebook right now called Where to Go When. And I'm basically taking the months and providing ideas for an epic trip, a festival or international trip, and then a U.S. trip for every month. And these are all places that I've actually been. So I've decided to kind of take my knowledge, my 13 years of travel, and put something together about that, which I'm really excited about. I'm just actually going through the rough draft right now, so putting the final edits on it. And then I'm also going to be working on this will come out hopefully this summer, a solo female travel over 40 kind of course that people can take that will help them get over their fears, maybe learn how to save money, all these tips for solo female travel, but uniquely for people that are more middle-aged.
Well, a lot of interesting things coming out.
Yeah. This is what happens when I have time at home.
Yeah. Get more creative with writing.
Yeah. I love it. Like I said, I'm a travel addict, obviously, so right. I can't say no to travel. So, I had all these ideas all the time, but getting on a plane would always win out.
So go to the final 5. What's your favorite cuisine? That might be a tough one, though. Just one. Name a couple if you like.
Oh, it is. I'm going to say Vietnamese. And a close second is probably Italian.
Speaking of Italian,
yeah.
I always ask, what's your favorite pizza? No, it doesn't have to.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah, okay.
That's easy. There's only one kind of pizza, and that's pizza from Naples, and it's going to be the tomato mozzarella.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to have to be the good buffalo mozzarella.
Right, yeah.
It has to be from Naples. Oh my God, it is the best. I did I did a video and an article once on how to eat pizza in Italy, because I don't know if you've ever ordered a pizza in Italy and it comes out and it's just one big pie, right? It's not sliced into nice little triangles like we're used to in America. And so for years I'd go to Italy and I'd get this pizza and I'd be like, how are you supposed to do this? Do you eat it like a steak, or am I supposed to cut it into my own like little triangles and so on? So I found some locals. I did a bunch of research and I found some locals to help me learn how to eat it like an Italian. So I had a lot of practice in Naples.
There's a lot of good pizza in Italy, and actually it kind of varies. Sometimes you don't get the best. So you get the...
Yeah.
So looking back before you started Travel Blog, what do you wish you had known before you started out?
Oh, I have to say, and I'm sure this is lots of people, I wish I knew more about how to actually monetize a blog, and specifically SEO, because I didn't, so search engine optimization, I didn't know anything about it. You know, I think it's kind of fascinating because there's a handful of us who all started a long time ago, you know, say 10 years or more ago. And we all got into it out of pure passion for travel. We didn't know we could ever make any money. We wanted to travel. And then it became this thing. And, you know, by the time I actually learned maybe how to blog better, as far as, you know, to make some revenue, basically. Yeah. I already had probably 400 articles and 4 years of writing, you know, that I had probably done wrong necessarily. So yeah, I mean, there are things there that I wish I would have known earlier, but at the same time, I also think it's helped prepare me for this time that we're in right now, like more than ever during COVID, like, and being quarantined and not being able to go anywhere, and all of my work kind of drying up a little bit for a temporary time at least. It feels like old times. It feels like those times where I just wrote whatever I wanted to write. It was my passion, and I wasn't making money, but I still loved it. I just like to share with people. And it really kind of brings you back to the basics of how I started and how many of us started.
My fourth question, I think you've kind of hit on this. I normally ask, what are the top 3 most memorable places you have visited?
Ooh.
Well, I think you've already probably hit them, but.
Yes, definitely. Antarctica, Mongolia. Probably the rest is kind of a toss-up. I'll say Jordan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last one, what is on your bucket list?
Ooh.
To name a few.
I do have stuff still on my bucket list. Namibia is one of them, a big one. I've always wanted to go there. Also, strangely, Bolivia. I've been a lot of places in South America, but I have not been to Bolivia. I've circled all around it. Where else? Ooh, the Yukon is one of the places I wanted to go to. It's, you know, Canada, so really remote. Alaska. And I've been to pretty much all the other provinces of Canada, but I have not been to the Yukon.
Little hard.
Those are the things that kind of come to mind.
Yeah, a little hard to get to the Yukon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've gotten up to what do they call it? Northwest Territory in Canada, and that was all the way up at the Arctic Ocean. So that was really fun too. I
guess it's not really that too hard. I guess, I mean, if you're in Alaska, you can just drive right across.
If you're in Alaska, you can just drive over into the Yukon.
Right. There's, I can't remember the name of that road, but there's right into Dalton or whatever. Or Dawson, whatever. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.
Again, I really appreciate Sherry joining me. Listeners, if you like the podcast, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're feeling real generous, please give it a rating. Until next time, happy travels.